Grace Washington's hands froze midair, the silver tray tilting toward catastrophe as her worn shoe caught the Persian carpet's deadly edge. Time crystallized in that heartbeat before disaster. $3,000 of Waterford crystals suspended between dignity and devastation. The explosion wasn't champagne hitting marble. It was 400 Chicago elites discovering entertainment at a cleaning lady's expense. Margaret Ashford Smith's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips, diamond bracelet catching ballroom light as her mouth opened in delighted shock. Board members leaned forward like vultures, sensing carrion. Cell phones emerged from designer clutches, hungry for viral humiliation. Grace knelt among the glittering wreckage, blood from crystal cuts mixing with Dom Perignon on Italian marble she'd mopped countless times. 3 years of invisible servitude had led to this moment, kneeling before people who'd never bothered learning her name, reduced to spectacle for their amusement. "Ladies and gentlemen," William Ashford IV's voice cut through the silence like a blade, "let's give our cleaning crew a special round of applause." What would happen next would transform Chicago's most exclusive charity gala into the city's most viral scandal. But Grace didn't know she was about to reclaim everything they'd stolen from her family for 60 years. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Grace Washington moves through the marble corridors of Ashford Financial Group Tower like a ghost, her footsteps muffled by thick carpeting that cost more per square foot than most people earn in a month. At 34, she carries herself with unconscious grace that hints at a past her Navy cleaning uniform can't quite disguise. Her movements are economical, practiced, the result of 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility in a world where being noticed means being found lacking. The 45th floor houses the executive offices, a realm of mahogany and crystal where decisions affecting thousands of lives are made between sips of imported coffee. Grace empties wastebaskets filled with documents worth millions, dusts furniture that could fund a family's dreams for years, and cleans windows that frame a view of Chicago she'll never enjoy from the inside looking out. She hums while she works, soft melodies from classical ballets that drift through empty offices like prayers whispered in a cathedral. Swan Lake, Giselle, The Nutcracker. Pieces that once defined her identity, now reduced to unconscious soundtrack for menial labor. The music helps her remember who she was before grief and circumstance transformed her from Grace Washington, owner of the prestigious Washington Dance Academy, into Grace Washington, third shift cleaning crew member, 247. Her past lives in faded photographs tucked inside her employee locker, images of elegant studios with polished hardwood floors and wall-to-wall mirrors, pictures of young dancers in pristine white leotards learning that their bodies could create poetry, newspaper clippings announcing regional tango championships won alongside her late husband Marcus. That woman seems like a character from someone else's story now, as distant as the childhood dreams that preceded adult responsibilities. The transformation began 5 years ago with screaming metal and shattering glass on Interstate 90. Marcus Washington, her husband of 8 years and dance partner of 12, died instantly when their Honda Civic was struck by a drunk driver returning from a casino. Grace survived with a shattered right leg, fractured ribs, and medical bills that consumed their savings like wildfire through dry timber. Physical therapy restored most of her mobility, but competitive dancing requires perfection she can no longer achieve. The studio closed 18 months after the accident, sold to pay debts accumulated during her recovery. Chicago's dance community remembered her with sympathy that gradually faded into polite discomfort. Former colleagues offered condolences that became increasingly awkward as months stretched into years without Grace returning to the world they shared. She became a reminder of how quickly circumstances could destroy carefully constructed lives, making her presence uncomfortable at industry events where people preferred celebrating success to acknowledging fragility. The cleaning job materialized through desperation rather than choice. Grace needed work that didn't require references from a dance career cut short by tragedy, employment that wouldn't judge her for gaps in traditional work history. Ashford Financial Group's overnight cleaning crew operated in shadow, invisible to executives who arrived each morning to spotless offices without considering the hands that created their pristine environment. For Grace, invisibility became survival strategy, a way to exist without explanation or pity. The crystal explodes against Italian marble like a gunshot, cutting through Chicago's most exclusive charity gala. Grace Washington freezes as $3,000 worth of Waterford champagne flutes shatter into countless fragments, each piece catching ballroom light like fallen stars. The sound reverberates through the Ashford Financial Group's executive dining hall, silencing 400 conversations simultaneously as Chicago's elite turn toward the woman in the navy cleaning uniform. Grace's worn shoe had caught the Persian carpet's edge, the same antique rug she'd vacuumed countless times, knowing every thread and dangerous wrinkle by heart. The silver tray, polished to mirror brightness by her own hands hours earlier, had tilted with inevitable gravity, sending Dom Perignon cascading across marble that cost more per square foot than most families spend on housing. The silence stretches like a held breath. Margaret Ashford Smith, William's imperious aunt, stops mid-sentence in her discourse about proper breeding and inherited grace. Board members pause with forks halfway to mouths filled with $40 appetizers. Socialites freeze behind champagne glasses that suddenly seem precious as diamonds, their laughter dying in throats accustomed to finding humor in others' misfortunes. Grace kneels among the wreckage, her uniform absorbing champagne that costs more than her monthly rent. Crystal shards cut through industrial-grade fabric, drawing thin lines of blood that mix with expensive alcohol, creating pink rivulets across white marble. Her hands shake as she begins collecting fragments, muscle memory taking over while her mind reels with calculations of replacement costs and probable termination. William Ashford IV rises from his seat at the head table with theatrical precision, his 6'2" frame commanding attention even without effort. At 42, he possesses the confident bearing of someone who's never doubted his place in the world, never questioned whether his opinions matter, never experienced the particular humiliation of being judged for circumstances beyond his control. His tailored tuxedo, worth more than Grace earns in 6 months, remains immaculate as he approaches the disaster with predatory satisfaction. The crowd senses entertainment. Cell phones emerge like weapons, ready to capture what promises to be Chicago's most viral humiliation of the social season. Someone giggles nervously. Others crane their necks for better views, unconsciously forming a circle around Grace's degradation like spectators at a gladiator match. "Ladies and gentlemen," William's voice carries across the ballroom with practiced authority. "Let's give our hard-working cleaning crew a round of applause for their dedication to keeping our event memorable." The applause that follows is scattered, patronizing, devastating. Each clap sounds like mockery disguised as appreciation, charity masquerading as respect. Grace continues collecting crystal shards, each piece a reminder of her expendability, her visibility only in moments of failure. But William's cruelty is just beginning. He strides toward the sound system with the confidence of someone who's never doubted his audience's attention, never questioned his right to entertainment at others' expense. The opening notes of Por una cabeza fill the ballroom, the tango made immortal in countless films, the dance that represents passion, precision, and partnership between equals. "You know," William announces, his voice projected to every corner of the room. "I've always believed that true refinement reveals itself in how someone moves. Not everyone can dance, particularly something as sophisticated as tango." He approaches Grace with calculated steps, each movement designed for maximum theatrical impact. The crowd follows his progression like audience members at a play, anticipating the dramatic climax their host has orchestrated for their entertainment. Grace remains kneeling, blood from crystal cuts staining her palms, mind racing through impossible mathematics. Her employment contract includes a clause about property damage deducted from wages. $3,000 represents nearly 4 months of her salary, money she desperately needs for medical bills, rent, and the basic dignity of keeping food in her refrigerator. "I have a proposition," William continues, standing directly above Grace with the casual dominance of someone who's never been the subject of public humiliation, "for our talented member of the cleaning staff." The anticipation in the room is palpable, electric with cruel expectation. Conversations halt completely. Even servers stop moving, sensing that whatever happens next will be discussed in Chicago's social circles for months. "If she can dance this tango, really dance it, not just shuffle around, I'll marry her right here tonight." William's smile contains all the warmth of a shark sensing blood in water. "In fact, let's make it interesting. $25,000 says she can't dance well enough to impress anyone in this room." The eruption is immediate and savage. Laughter explodes from 400 throats. Applause thunders across marble, and voices shout encouragement that sounds suspiciously like the cheers at public executions. Someone yells, "Do it!" Others whistle and stomp, transforming Chicago's most elegant charity gala into a coliseum where entertainment requires someone's dignity as sacrifice. Grace slowly rises from her knees, crystal crunching under practical shoes that have walked thousands of miles through hallways where she remains invisible until moments like these. Grace stands slowly, crystal fragments cascading from her uniform like rain from storm clouds. The ballroom falls into expectant silence as 400 of Chicago's most privileged citizens wait to witness what they assume will be spectacular humiliation. William Ashford extends his manicured hand with theatrical magnanimity, expecting to lead a trembling cleaning woman through clumsy approximations of steps she couldn't possibly know. Instead, Grace removes her worn black shoes with deliberate precision, placing them beside the shattered crystal with the care of someone who understands the value of proper preparation. Her bare feet touch marble that she's mopped countless times, but now the contact feels different. Intimate, purposeful, like a pianist's fingers finding familiar keys after years of silence. The transformation begins the moment her soles meet the floor. Grace's posture straightens with unconscious authority, her shoulders squaring as muscle memory awakens from its 3-year slumber. The woman who has spent years perfecting invisibility suddenly commands the room's complete attention through presence alone. Dorothy Chen, the 78-year-old night janitor, recognizes the change immediately from her position at the service station. 40 years of Broadway stages taught her to identify performers, and she's watching one emerge from a cocoon of forced humility. "Sweet Jesus," she whispers to James Mitchell, the security guard standing nearby. "That woman's about to show these people what real class looks like." When Grace accepts William's offered hand, she doesn't grip it with the desperate gratitude he expected. Her fingers settle into position with the confident precision of someone who has led countless students through these same movements, who has competed at national levels, who once commanded stages with the same authority William uses to command boardrooms. The opening notes of Por una cabeza fill the air with their haunting melody, and Grace begins to move. Her first step isn't the tentative shuffle of someone hoping not to embarrass herself. It's the purposeful stride of a dancer claiming her territory. William, suddenly finding himself partnered with someone who actually knows what she's doing, must either match her level or be exposed as the amateur he truly is. Grace leads him through the fundamental 8 count with growing confidence, her body remembering every lesson from her former life. The basic walk, the pause, the subtle weight shifts that create the dance's characteristic tension. Each movement flows from her core with the naturalness of breathing. The crowd's cruel laughter begins to fade as realization dawns that they're not watching mockery, but mastery. Margaret Ashford Smith's champagne glass freezes halfway to her lips as she witnesses her nephew being outdanced by a woman in a cleaning uniform. Board members who were preparing cruel commentary find themselves genuinely impressed despite their prejudices. The phones that emerged to capture humiliation now record something entirely different: dignity asserting itself through art. William feels the shift in dynamics with growing alarm. He assumed he would guide Grace through simple movements while she struggled not to stumble. Instead, he finds himself struggling to keep pace with someone whose technical skill far exceeds his own casual familiarity with ballroom basics. Grace's confidence is magnetic, her precision undeniable, her grace evident in every gesture. The dance evolves from basic steps into more complex patterns as Grace's muscle memory fully awakens. She executes perfect ochos, the figure-8 movements that define advanced tango, her hips creating fluid lines that speak of years of professional training. William follows because he has no choice. Her leadership is so clear, so assured, that resistance would expose his own limitations. But this performance transcends technical excellence. Grace isn't merely demonstrating steps she remembers, she's telling her story through movement. The dance becomes autobiography, her joy in discovering her talent, her partnership with Marcus, the grief of loss, the struggle for survival, and now, improbably, this moment of vindication in front of people who never saw her worth. The tango builds to its passionate climax, and Grace guides William through combinations she hasn't attempted in 5 years. Her body remembers not just the movements but the emotions they express: longing, defiance, surrender, triumph. The terminal cancer diagnosis hidden in her uniform pocket seems irrelevant as her spirit soars through motion that once defined her identity. Dorothy Chen starts the applause before the music ends, her weathered hands clapping with the authority of someone who recognizes genuine artistry. Other employees follow her lead: maintenance staff, security guards, servers who understand what it means to be invisible until moments of crisis or, rarely, triumph. The standing ovation spreads from the working staff to reluctant board members, from impressed socialites to genuinely moved philanthropists. These are people accustomed to entertainment that costs thousands to witness, yet they're applauding a performance given by someone they pay minimum wage to empty their trash cans. Grace concludes with a dramatic back arch that showcases both her flexibility and her theatrical instincts, holding the position long enough for the ballroom to appreciate the artistry they've witnessed. When she returns to standing position, her breathing is controlled, her expression serene, her dignity completely restored. The silence that follows the applause carries weight beyond mere appreciation. 400 people are processing the cognitive dissonance of watching someone they considered beneath their notice demonstrate mastery they don't possess. The comfortable assumptions about class, breeding, and inherent worth have been challenged by 3 minutes and 47 seconds of perfect tango. William stares at Grace as if seeing her for the first time, which in many ways he is. The woman he's observed cleaning his office for 3 years has just revealed herself as an artist of considerable skill, someone whose presence in his building represents not charity employment but wasted potential. "Mr. Ashford," Grace says, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "I believe you owe me $25,000. She pauses, allowing the full impact of her victory to settle. And apparently, a wedding. The eruption of cheers and applause that follows isn't mocking or patronizing. It's genuine celebration of justice served and assumptions shattered. Grace Washington has just transformed from invisible servant to undeniable presence, from object of pity to source of inspiration. The viral video spreads across social media like wildfire through dry prairie grass. Within 6 hours of the charity gala, Cleaning Lady's perfect tango humiliates arrogant billionaire accumulates over 2 million views on various platforms. The comments section becomes a battleground between those celebrating Grace's triumph and others questioning the authenticity of her performance. By Monday morning, news outlets from CNN to local Chicago stations are requesting interviews with the mysterious woman who transformed a moment of intended humiliation into viral vindication. Grace returns to work that evening expecting termination, public embarrassment having historically been grounds for immediate dismissal in her experience with Chicago's elite employers. Instead, she finds her usual cleaning supplies replaced by a formal invitation to William Ashford's office, printed on company letterhead and requesting her presence at 9 o'clock sharp. The elevator ride to the 45th floor feels like ascending to judgment, each floor marking another level of anxiety about her professional future. William's office occupies half the executive floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Lake Michigan that Grace has admired from the outside while cleaning the glass. The mahogany desk, imported Italian leather furniture, and Persian rugs represent more wealth than she'll encounter in several lifetimes. Yet William appears diminished behind his massive desk, somehow smaller than the commanding figure who orchestrated her public humiliation just 3 nights earlier. "Grace," he says, and hearing her actual name from his lips for the first time in 3 years creates an odd intimacy in the cavernous office. "Please, sit down." She remains standing, unwilling to accept the illusion of equality that sitting might suggest. 3 years of subservience don't evaporate overnight, but they no longer define the boundaries of their interaction. "Your check, Mr. Ashford, $25,000, as agreed." William slides an envelope across the polished desktop, his movements careful and deliberate. "The money is yours, of course. But Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Grace examines the check briefly before folding it into her uniform pocket. $25,000 represents freedom from her most pressing debts, breathing room she hasn't enjoyed since Marcus's death, yet accepting it feels oddly hollow without understanding William's motivations. "What do you want to know?" William stands and approaches the window, his back turned as he speaks. "Your grandmother's maiden name before she married?" "I need to know what it was." The question strikes Grace as completely irrelevant to their professional relationship. Yet something in William's tone suggests deeper significance than casual curiosity. "Why does that matter?" "Because I think—" William turns from the window, his expression carrying an uncertainty she's never witnessed in their brief interactions. "I think you might be connected to someone who changed my family's history in ways you don't understand." He opens his laptop, displaying a black-and-white photograph from what appears to be the 1960s. The image shows a young African-American woman in an elegant evening gown dancing with a white man in a tuxedo. The woman's face bears an unmistakable resemblance to Grace, the same high cheekbones, graceful neck, and confident bearing that transforms ordinary features into striking beauty. "That's my great-grandfather, James Edward Ashford II, William explains, "and the woman he's dancing with is named Ruth Jackson." "This photograph was taken in 1963, hidden away for 60 years because my family couldn't acknowledge what it represented." Grace stares at the image with growing recognition. The woman in the photograph doesn't just resemble her. She looks exactly like the person Grace remembers from faded family photos, the grandmother who died when Grace was 12, but whose story shaped her understanding of dignity, resilience, and the complexity of love across racial boundaries. "My grandmother was Ruth Jackson," Grace whispers, "before she married my grandfather in 1964. The confirmation lands between them like a thunderclap, reshaping everything they thought they understood about their relationship. William closes his eyes as if absorbing physical pain, then continues with the controlled voice of someone delivering devastating news. James Edward Ashford II had a relationship with Ruth Jackson that lasted 2 years. When she became pregnant, he faced an impossible choice for a white man in 1963: acknowledge the relationship and lose his family's business empire, or protect his inheritance by abandoning the woman he loved. Grace sinks into the chair she'd refused moments earlier, her legs suddenly unable to support the weight of revelation. The comfortable assumptions about her family's history, her grandmother's move from Chicago to Detroit, her grandfather's acceptance of a woman with an unexplained child, the financial struggles that defined Grace's childhood, all rearranged themselves around this new information. "He chose the business," William continues, producing a leather portfolio filled with documents, letters, and legal papers. "Gave Ruth $50,000, a significant sum in 1964, with explicit instructions to leave Chicago and never return." But the story doesn't end there. William opens the portfolio, revealing correspondence spanning decades. James Edward Ashford II's handwriting fills page after page, letters never sent, private investigators' reports, financial records showing money set aside but never claimed. "My great-grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to find Ruth and her son, your father. He regretted his choice every day for 37 years, setting aside money, creating trust funds, even hiring private detectives. When he died in 1975, he left specific instructions in his will. If Ruth Jackson or her descendants were ever located, they would inherit 40% of the Ashford estate." Grace's world tilts completely off its axis. The revelation that she spent 3 years cleaning offices she should partially own, accepting minimum wage for labor performed in a building her family has legal claim to, creates a cognitive dissonance almost too large to process. "You knew," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you hired me, when you've been watching me work for 3 years, you knew who I was." William's face confirms her accusation before his words do. "I suspected from the moment I saw your employment application. Ruth Jackson's granddaughter applying for a cleaning position in the building her family should have inherited. The irony was intoxicating. The cruelty isn't random. It's calculated revenge for circumstances neither Grace nor William created, but both inherited. His systematic humiliation of her has been conscious punishment for his great-grandfather's guilt, displaced anger at a situation that robbed him of moral superiority while simultaneously benefiting from historical injustice. "So you made me scrub toilets and empty trash cans because you were angry about something that happened before I was born?" "I was angry at the situation, angry at the guilt I inherited along with the money, angry at—" William struggles with confession. "Angry at being attracted to someone I thought I should consider beneath me, when I knew she was actually entitled to everything I had." The admission of attraction alongside systematic cruelty reveals the complexity of William's psychology: desire twisted into punishment, guilt transformed into aggression, acknowledgement of Grace's worth expressed through deliberate degradation. "There's more," William continues, his voice heavy with additional revelations. "The company is nearly bankrupt. My father spent decades stealing from the trust fund set aside for Ruth Jackson's descendants, using the money to cover gambling debts and failed investments. By the time I inherited Ashford Financial Group, your family's money had been embezzled to maintain our lifestyle." Grace processes information that would have been overwhelming individually, now arriving in waves that threaten to drown her comprehension. She's not just the rightful heir to wealth she never knew existed, she's also the victim of systematic theft spanning 2 generations. How much? She asks. Including accrued interest and penalties, approximately $400 million. But Grace, claiming that inheritance means taking responsibility for a company 3 months from bankruptcy, with 1,500 employees who lose their jobs if we can't find immediate financing. The final revelation completes the picture of cosmic irony. Grace discovers she's wealthy enough to save the company that's employed her as invisible labor, but claiming her inheritance means accepting responsibility for the livelihoods of people who never acknowledged her humanity. "I need time to think," Grace says, standing to leave. "This is too much information to process while standing in the office where I've emptied your trash for 3 years." "Grace, wait!" William's voice carries desperation she's never heard from him. "There's something else you need to know, something that changes the timeline for any decisions you might make." She pauses at the door, exhausted by revelations that keep multiplying beyond her capacity for absorption. "I have early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis came 6 months ago, and the progression is faster than typical. I have maybe 2 years before significant cognitive decline, 18 months before I'll need full-time care." Grace stares at him, trying to integrate this final piece of information into an already impossible puzzle. The man who has tormented her for 3 years, who owes her $400 million, who has just revealed attraction disguised as cruelty, is also facing the gradual erasure of his own identity. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because soon I'll forget that I was cruel to you, but I'll probably remember that I was attracted to you." The disease takes recent memories first, leaves older emotional impressions intact. "I wanted you to know the truth while I'm still capable of shame about my behavior." Grace leaves William's office carrying more information than she can process, more money than she can spend, and more ethical complexity than she feels equipped to resolve. The $25,000 check in her pocket feels insignificant compared to the $400 million she's legally entitled to claim, yet both pale beside the weight of decisions that will affect hundreds of lives and 2 families' legacy of pain. Grace sits in her cramped studio apartment at 3 in the morning, surrounded by medical bills she can now afford to pay and legal documents that reshape everything she thought she knew about justice, family, and inherited responsibility. The $25,000 check lies on her kitchen table beside the leather portfolio William gave her, containing 60 years of hidden correspondence between James Edward Ashford II and private investigators searching for Ruth Jackson's family. The apartment feels different now that she knows she could afford to live anywhere in Chicago. The water stain on the ceiling, the radiator that clanks through winter nights, the thin walls that broadcast her neighbors' arguments, all of it represents choices rather than circumstances. Yet leaving feels like abandoning the person she's become through struggle, trading earned wisdom for inherited comfort. She opens the medical envelope she's been avoiding for 3 weeks, the one containing test results that will determine whether she has months or years to enjoy whatever future she chooses. The oncologist's letterhead carries the weight of finality she's been postponing through deliberate ignorance. Advanced pancreatic cancer, stage 4, metastatic. The clinical language transforms her body into a battlefield where she's already lost the war. Prognosis 6 to 8 months with aggressive treatment, 3 to 4 months with palliative care only. Grace sets the letter down with surprising calm, having suspected this outcome since the abdominal pain began 6 months ago. The irony completes itself with mathematical precision. She inherits $400 million at the exact moment she learns she's dying. The universe's timing remains impeccable in its cruelty, offering her everything she needed when she no longer has time to enjoy it. Grace makes coffee and sits by her window overlooking the alley where she's watched sunrise for 3 years. The city awakens with its usual rhythm. Delivery trucks rumbling through narrow streets, early commuters hurrying toward elevated train stations, the gradual illumination of office buildings where night shift workers prepare spaces for people who will never know their names. Dorothy Chen appears in the alley at 5:30, exactly on schedule, walking toward the bus stop that will take her to Ashford Tower for another night of invisible labor. Grace opens her window and calls down to the street. "Dorothy, wait up!" The older woman looks up with surprise, then concern. In 3 years, Grace has never deviated from their professional boundaries, never suggested friendship beyond their shared circumstances of night shift employment. "Child, what are you doing awake at this hour?" "You look like you haven't slept." Grace descends to the alley, still wearing yesterday's clothes, carrying the portfolio that contains both women's transformed futures. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible. Can you sit with me for a few minutes?" They sit on Grace's building's front steps as Chicago morning traffic builds around them. Grace explains everything: the inheritance, William's knowledge of her identity, the systematic cruelty designed to punish her for crimes she didn't commit, and the company's impending bankruptcy that threatens 1,500 jobs, including Dorothy's. Dorothy listens without interruption, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her expression shifting from skepticism to amazement to something approaching maternal pride. "So you're telling me," Dorothy says when Grace finishes, "that you've been cleaning offices you actually own, and that white boy has been treating you like dirt because he knew you were entitled to his money?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Dorothy shakes her head with a bitter laugh. "Lord have mercy. 60 years I've been working for rich folks, watching them step over people who deserved better. Never thought I'd live to see one of those stepped-on people turn out to be richer than the ones doing the stepping." Grace produces the medical letter, the final piece of information that transforms triumph into tragedy. Dorothy reads in silence, then folds Grace into a hug that spans decades of shared struggle and sudden understanding. "How long?" Dorothy asks. 6 months, maybe 8 with treatment. They sit in silence as morning light strengthens around them, two women who have spent years invisible to the powerful, processing news that changes everything except the fundamental injustice of their circumstances. "What are you going to do?" Dorothy asks. "I don't know. I could take the money and disappear, let the company collapse, and William face bankruptcy along with his Alzheimer's. Justice after 60 years of theft and 3 years of humiliation. But 1,500 people lose their jobs. You lose your job. James loses his job. All the security guards, maintenance workers, administrative assistants, people who never hurt anyone, who just need work to survive." Dorothy studies Grace's face with the penetrating gaze of someone who has witnessed decades of human complexity, who understands that moral clarity rarely survives contact with actual circumstances. "You're thinking about saving the company," Dorothy observes. "I'm thinking about using my inheritance to prevent bankruptcy, restructuring ownership so employees have profit sharing and job security, making sure what happened to my family never happens to anyone else's family." "And William?" Grace's expression hardens. "William faces the consequences of his family's choices and his own cruelty. Alzheimer's will take his memories, but before it does, he gets to live with the knowledge that the woman he tormented for 3 years saved everything he cared about despite having every reason to destroy it." Dorothy nods slowly. "That's either the most Christian thing I've ever heard or the most sophisticated revenge imaginable. Maybe both." They return to Grace's apartment where she calls the law firm handling James Edward Ashford II's estate, scheduling meetings that will begin the process of claiming her inheritance and restructuring Ashford Financial Group. The lawyers express amazement at finally locating Ruth Jackson's descendants after 60 years of searching, but Grace cuts through their excitement with practical questions about timeline, tax implications, and corporate reorganization. Next, she calls her oncologist, scheduling aggressive treatment that will buy her time to complete the company transformation. Chemotherapy will steal her remaining strength and energy, but she needs to survive long enough to ensure the employee ownership structure can't be reversed after her death. The final call goes to William's office. His secretary, Linda Ashford Jones, answers with the crisp efficiency that protects executives from unwanted intrusions. "Mr. Ashford's office, how may I help you?" "This is Grace Washington. Tell Mr. Ashford I'll see him tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss my inheritance and his company's future. Also tell him I know about his Alzheimer's diagnosis and we need to discuss transition plans that protect everyone's interests." Linda's professional composure falters. "Ms. Washington, Mr. Ashford mentioned you might be calling. He's been expecting this conversation." "Has he now? Then he won't be surprised by what I have to say." Grace hangs up and looks around her apartment one final time as simply Grace Washington, night shift cleaning crew member 247. Tomorrow, she becomes Grace Washington, majority shareholder of Ashford Financial Group, terminally ill woman racing against time to transform inherited injustice into chosen justice. She spends the afternoon writing letters to Marcus, explaining how she learned to forgive without forgetting. To her parents, describing the grandmother they never really knew. To Dorothy and James and the other invisible workers, promising that their labor will finally be valued appropriately. As sunset approaches, Grace returns to her window overlooking the alley. Soon she'll live somewhere with better views, cleaner air, and neighbors who don't know her story. But this apartment taught her that dignity isn't determined by address, that worth isn't measured by possessions, and that sometimes the most powerful people are wearing the humblest uniforms. Tomorrow, she begins the most complex negotiation of her life, using her inheritance to save the company that employed her as invisible labor, while ensuring the man who tormented her faces consequences for his cruelty. Justice and mercy will dance together like partners in a tango, each step calculated to honor both the woman she was and the woman she's becoming in her final months. The boardroom confrontation happens on a Tuesday morning when Chicago's autumn light filters through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany table where Grace Washington sits at the head, her rightful position as majority shareholder. The DNA tests confirming her lineage lie before the assembled lawyers, accountants, and board members, like evidence in a trial where the verdict was predetermined 60 years ago. William Ashford enters the room 10 minutes late, his usual punctuality compromised by the early stages of cognitive decline that make simple tasks increasingly complex. He moves with less certainty than Grace remembers, his confident stride replaced by careful steps that suggest a man no longer entirely sure of his footing in familiar spaces. "Grace," he says, taking his seat across from her with the strange formality of adversaries who share intimate knowledge. "I assume you've had time to review the documentation. The legal papers spread across the table tell a story of systematic theft spanning 2 generations. William's father, James Edward Ashford III, had embezzled nearly $200 million from the trust fund established for Ruth Jackson's descendants, using the money to cover gambling debts accumulated in Atlantic City casinos and failed investments in Florida real estate schemes that collapsed with market fluctuations. "I've reviewed everything," Grace replies, her voice carrying the controlled authority of someone who has spent weeks preparing for this moment. "The inheritance theft, the company's hidden bankruptcy, and your knowledge of my identity during 3 years of employment. Grace slides financial statements across the table showing Ashford Financial Group's true condition. Creative accounting that conceals massive debt, shell companies used to hide losses, and desperate borrowing that has pushed the firm within 90 days of complete collapse. The company owes me $400 million in stolen inheritance, plus interest and penalties. But more immediately, you need $300 million in emergency financing to prevent bankruptcy and the loss of 1,500 jobs. Board member Margaret Ashford Smith, William's imperious aunt, speaks for the first time since entering the room. Surely you can't expect this family to simply hand over our life's work to someone who... She stops, recognizing that completing her thought would expose the racial prejudices underlying decades of family decisions. To someone who what, Mrs. Ashford Smith? Grace's question hangs in the air like a challenge that demands honest response. To someone whose family was robbed by yours? To someone you've watched clean your nephew's office for 3 years without acknowledging her humanity? To someone who has every legal right to destroy this company and leave all of you bankrupt? The silence that follows carries the weight of acknowledged guilt and unavoidable consequence. Grace continues, her voice gaining strength as she outlines terms that will reshape everything the Ashford name represents. Here's what I'm offering. I'll invest my inheritance back into the company to prevent bankruptcy, but with conditions that transform this business from a family empire into a worker-owned cooperative. Every employee, from executive assistants to security guards, receives profit-sharing and ownership stakes based on their length of service. She produces documents prepared by the law firm representing her interests, legal structures that will prevent future exploitation while ensuring job security for everyone currently employed. Dorothy Chen, who has cleaned your offices for 23 years, will own the same percentage as any executive hired this year. James Mitchell, who has provided security for 15 years, will have voting rights in company decisions that affect his livelihood. No more invisible workers, no more disposable people. William reads the proposal with expressions shifting from surprise to admiration to something approaching relief. The cognitive burden of managing a failing company while facing Alzheimer's has created stress that accelerates his neurological decline, making Grace's intervention both personal salvation and professional necessity. And my role in this new structure? William asks. Grace's smile contains no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of justice finally served. You become an employee like everyone else. No special privileges, no inherited authority, no power over people you've spent years treating as inferior. You earn your place through competence and contribution, just like Dorothy and James have been doing all along. The legal implications become clear as attorneys explain voting structures, profit-sharing formulas, and governance procedures that will prevent future concentrations of power in single individuals or families. Grace has designed a system that makes the Ashford family's historical exploitation structurally impossible. What about when... William hesitates, then forces himself to continue. What about when the Alzheimer's progresses? When I can no longer contribute meaningfully to company operations? Grace's expression softens slightly, recognizing the vulnerability required for William to acknowledge his declining capacity in front of family members and business associates who have never seen him admit weakness. The company will provide full medical care and living expenses for as long as you need them. Dignity in illness, support through decline, the same consideration you should have offered employees facing health crises over the years. The moral complexity of Grace's proposal impresses everyone present. She's chosen mercy over revenge while ensuring justice through systemic change, using her inheritance to prevent the suffering that defined her own experience while guaranteeing William faces consequences for his cruelty without being abandoned to face illness alone. Margaret Ashford Smith attempts one final objection. This is preposterous. You can't simply walk into a family business and restructure everything according to your political ideologies. Grace stands, her presence commanding the room with authority earned through 3 years of invisible labor and 60 years of inherited injustice. Mrs. Ashford Smith, this stopped being a family business the moment your family began stealing from mine. This is now a corporation majority owned by Ruth Jackson's descendants, managed according to principles that ensure no other family suffers what mine suffered. She moves to the windows overlooking downtown Chicago, the city spread below like a map of possibilities and limitations, dreams achieved and deferred, justice delayed, but not permanently denied. "I have 6 months to live," Grace announces, her voice carrying across the boardroom like a physical force. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed 3 weeks ago. These changes take effect immediately because I won't survive long enough to implement them gradually." The revelation transforms the entire negotiation. Grace isn't just claiming her inheritance. She's racing against time to complete a transformation that will outlive her, creating systemic protections for vulnerable workers while ensuring the Ashford family faces consequences for historical injustice. William's face goes pale as he processes the information. "Grace, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You're not sorry about my cancer, William. You're sorry that you won't have more time to assuage your guilt through extended apologies and gradual behavioral changes. Death has a way of clarifying which emotions are genuine and which are performed for social comfort." The brutal honesty silences the room. Grace continues, her voice steady despite discussing her own mortality in front of people who have spent years treating her as expendable. "The employee ownership structure includes provisions for my death. Control passes to a board elected by workers, with Dorothy Chen as the initial president. No individual will ever again possess the power to humiliate, exploit, or render invisible the people whose labor creates this company's wealth." Legal documents are signed over the following 3 hours, transforming Ashford Financial Group from family dynasty into worker cooperative, while Grace watches William process the magnitude of change she's implementing with months remaining in her life. As the meeting concludes, William approaches Grace with the uncertainty of someone who no longer understands the social dynamics governing their relationship. "Grace, I need you to know that I never intended for things to develop this way. The cruelty, the humiliation, I was angry at circumstances neither of us created." Grace studies his face, seeing both the man who tormented her and the man facing progressive cognitive decline with the same vulnerability she faces terminal cancer. "William, your intentions don't change 3 years of systematic cruelty. But your Alzheimer's diagnosis doesn't eliminate the possibility of redemption in whatever time you have left. Use your remaining clarity to understand what dignity means, what respect costs, what justice requires." She leaves him standing in the boardroom where his family's empire has just been transformed into her legacy, walking toward an elevator that will carry her to offices she now owns, where she'll spend her final months ensuring that invisible workers never again disappear into the machinery of other people's prosperity. The wedding is scheduled for Christmas Eve. Grace's deliberate choice to celebrate love during the season traditionally associated with hope and redemption. But by Thanksgiving, both she and William are losing their respective battles against time with a speed that transforms their engagement from romantic triumph into race against mortality. Grace's cancer has progressed with the aggressive efficiency that makes pancreatic malignancy among medicine's most feared diagnoses. The 23 pounds she's lost since her diagnosis have transformed her from the graceful woman who danced tango into a figure whose elegant bones now protrude sharply beneath skin that has acquired the waxy pallor of systemic failure. Her movements, once fluid and unconscious, now require deliberate calculation, as pain medication creates a constant fog that blurs the boundaries between consciousness and dream. William's Alzheimer's has accelerated under the compound stress of corporate transformation, public scrutiny, and impending marriage to someone whose forgiveness he struggles to understand or deserve. Simple tasks that once required no conscious thought, remembering appointments, recognizing longtime colleagues, following conversations through to their conclusions, now demand exhausting concentration that leaves him confused and frightened by his own mental landscape. The tragedy unfolds during what should be their final dress rehearsal in Grace's new penthouse apartment, purchased with inheritance money she barely has time to enjoy. She stands before an antique mirror wearing her grandmother Ruth's wedding dress, the same ivory silk gown Ruth wore in 1964 when she married Grace's grandfather after fleeing Chicago with secrets that would remain buried for 60 years. Dorothy Chen and Linda Ashford Jones work together to alter the dress for Grace's dramatically changed body, their conversation revealing truths everyone has been avoiding. The ivory silk, carefully preserved in tissue paper and mothballs, hangs loose on Grace's diminished frame like clothing borrowed from someone healthier, more substantial, more likely to survive her own wedding. "Honey," Dorothy says with the gentle directness that comes from decades of caring for people others prefer to ignore, "when's the last time you kept down a full meal?" Grace's reflection shows the unmistakable signs of advanced cancer, hollowed cheeks that emphasize bone structure, eyes that burn with fierce determination despite physical decline, and the particular fragility that comes from a body consuming itself to fuel its final months of existence. "I eat when the nausea permits," Grace replies, her voice carrying less power than anyone wants to acknowledge. "Some days that's crackers and ginger ale. My good days include actual protein." Linda, who has evolved from William's protective assistant to Grace's unlikely confidant, abandons professional discretion for honest concern. "Grace, Dr. Martinez called yesterday about your latest blood work. Your kidney function is declining rapidly. She wants to discuss transitioning to hospice care." The word hospice settles over the elegant bedroom like a funeral shroud, transforming wedding preparations into death watch. Grace has intellectually understood this moment would arrive, but hearing it spoken aloud converts abstract medical decline into concrete timeline measured in weeks rather than months. "How long?" Grace asks, still studying her reflection as if memorizing the face she'll soon leave behind. "Days to weeks if the kidney failure accelerates," Linda responds. "Maybe a month with aggressive intervention, but the treatments would make your remaining time miserable." Meanwhile, 3 floors below, in what used to be his private study, William sits surrounded by legal documents he no longer fully comprehends, holding a photograph from their engagement party while tears stream down his face in patterns he doesn't remember creating. James Mitchell finds him there during his security rounds, recognizing the confusion that has become William's most consistent emotional state as his short-term memory fails with increasing frequency. "Mr. William," James approaches with the patient kindness earned through 40 years of observing powerful people at their most vulnerable moments, "you asked me to check on you at 9 o'clock. William looks up with the blank expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle missing essential pieces. "Did I? I seem to have forgotten why I wanted you here." "You wanted to review the wedding arrangements, sir." "The ceremony is scheduled for next week." "Wedding?" William's confusion deepens as he studies the engagement photograph with genuine bewilderment. "Whose wedding?" The heartbreak is immediate and absolute. William has forgotten that he's marrying Grace in 6 days, forgotten the woman who transformed his understanding of justice and mercy, forgotten the most meaningful relationship of his adult life. The disease has stolen not just his memory but his capacity to understand why the beautiful woman in the photograph matters to his present circumstances. James, drawing on decades of experience with Chicago's elite during their moments of crisis, shows William the engagement photo with careful patience. "This is your fiancée, Grace Washington." You're marrying her on Christmas Eve. William studies the image with the intense concentration of someone attempting to recognize a face that should be familiar, but remains persistently foreign. She's beautiful, he says with genuine appreciation unmarred by recognition. Do I know her well? She worked here for 3 years, sir. She's also your business partner now, and you love her very much. I love her? William sounds genuinely surprised by this information, as if learning about someone else's romantic attachment. How wonderful for me. I should go see her and reintroduce myself. When William appears in the bridal suite, Grace takes one look at his confused, well-meaning expression and understands immediately that the man who proposed to her 4 months ago has been replaced by a stranger wearing his face. The William who learned to love her, who chose redemption over pride, who asked for her hand in marriage while acknowledging his cruelty. That person no longer exists. "Hello," William says with the genuine warmth of someone meeting an attractive stranger. "I'm told you're marrying me next week." "I'm terribly sorry, but I seem to have forgotten our entire courtship." Grace's carefully maintained composure finally cracks completely. She has spent months preparing for her own death, accepting the reality of terminal cancer with the dignity that has characterized her response to every crisis in her adult life. But she never anticipated the particular grief of watching someone she loves disappear while still physically present, mourning a relationship that has ended not through death or choice but through neurological erasure. "William," she whispers, "do you remember the charity gala? The night we danced together?" William's forehead creases with genuine effort as he searches memory banks that no longer contain the experiences that define their connection. "I'm sorry, I don't recall, but I would very much like to dance with you now, if you'd enjoy that." The cruelty is unintentional but devastating. Grace is watching the love of her abbreviated life vanish into cognitive fog while she herself dies by degrees, creating a double loss designed by a universe apparently committed to denying happiness to anyone brave enough to choose hope over cynicism. Dorothy witnesses this exchange and quietly escorts William from the room, leaving Grace alone with a wedding dress that will never be worn and an engagement ring that symbolizes promises no one remembers making. That evening, Grace makes the most difficult decision of her life, calling off the wedding with a clarity that surprises even her closest friends. "I cannot marry someone who doesn't remember why he wanted to marry me," she explains to Dorothy, James, and Linda as they gather in her penthouse living room. "It would be accepting charity disguised as love, and I'm too proud and too tired for that particular form of self-deception." "But he does love you now?" Dorothy argues. "Maybe not with memory, but with immediate affection. Isn't that still a form of love?" "It's kindness toward a stranger," Grace replies. "And while I'm grateful for kindness, I won't build a marriage on the foundation of forgotten emotions and erased history." The wedding cancellation becomes national news within hours, social media exploding with commentary about the tragic love story between the cleaning lady turned heiress and the billionaire facing cognitive decline. The narrative that had inspired millions with its message of redemption and transformation now breaks hearts with its demonstration of how illness can steal not just individuals, but the relationships that define their meaning. Grace moves into hospice care the following week, choosing a facility overlooking Lake Michigan rather than dying in the penthouse that represents triumph. She's too ill to enjoy. William, increasingly confused by changes in routine and environment, asks repeatedly about the nice lady who was going to marry me, but forgets the answers as quickly as they're provided. Grace enters her 6th day in hospice care, drifting between morphine-softened consciousness and vivid dreams that blur the boundary between memory and medication. The pain management has reached levels that transform her waking hours into a hazy middle ground where past and present intersect with startling clarity, allowing her to visit moments she had forgotten and conversations with people she has lost. She dreams of Marcus, her first husband, who appears as vibrant and protective as he was before the accident that claimed his life. In her morphine-enhanced visions, he expresses no jealousy about William, but genuine concern about her choices during these final weeks. "Gracie," he says, using the pet name that belonged exclusively to their marriage, "why are you giving up on him when he needs you most?" "He doesn't remember me, baby. He doesn't remember our love, our engagement, or even why he wanted to change." "But you remember him," Marcus replies with the patient wisdom that characterized their relationship. "Isn't your memory strong enough to carry both of you through this?" Grace wakes with tears on her cheeks and a determination that surprises Dorothy, who has been maintaining vigil beside the hospice bed. The dream conversation with Marcus has crystallized something Grace hadn't fully understood about love, memory, and the responsibility that survives when one partner can no longer share the burden of remembering their shared story. "I need to see William," Grace whispers, her voice barely audible above the mechanical sounds of medical equipment monitoring her body's systematic failure. Not for closure or romantic gestures, but because there are truths I need to speak while I still have the strength to form words. Dorothy hesitates, understanding the physical toll such a visit would require. "Honey, he won't understand what you're telling him. Yesterday he asked me 3 times who you were and seemed genuinely surprised each time I explained. I'm not doing this for his understanding," Grace responds with clarity that cuts through her medication-induced fog. "I'm doing this because some truths need to be spoken, regardless of whether they're remembered or comprehended. Love isn't always about mutual recognition. Sometimes it's about carrying the full weight of connection when the other person can no longer help bear that load." Meanwhile, William has been experiencing his own unexpected transformation. The Alzheimer's progression, while stealing recent memories with ruthless efficiency, has begun revealing much older recollections with startling vividness. He finds himself remembering his childhood with unprecedented clarity, reliving conversations with his father about family guilt and inherited responsibility, and most surprisingly, accessing suppressed memories of watching Grace during her earliest months at Ashford Financial Group. Dr. Sarah Chen, Dorothy's daughter and William's neurologist, explains this phenomenon to Linda during one of her regular consultations. It's called temporal displacement with enhanced consolidation. William is losing recent memories but accessing older ones with greater clarity than he possessed before the disease progression. What does that mean for his memories of Grace? It means he might remember falling in love with her before he consciously admitted those feelings to himself, before his pride and prejudice complicated his emotional responses. This medical revelation coincides exactly with Grace's transportation to William's penthouse apartment, her final request before transitioning to comfort care only. She wants to die in a space overlooking the city she has loved, fought within, and ultimately transformed, rather than in the sterile environment of institutional health care. The penthouse has been converted into a comprehensive medical facility, with Dorothy, Linda, and James taking rotating shifts as caregivers for both Grace and William. The arrangement represents an unprecedented intimacy, the billionaire with progressive dementia and the dying heiress being cared for by the working-class people whose lives they have both saved through their complicated love story. When William discovers Grace in what used to be his formal dining room, now transformed into a sunlit bedroom overlooking Lake Michigan, she appears to be sleeping peacefully, despite the medical equipment surrounding her bed. For several minutes, he simply observes her with an expression of profound recognition that transcends his recent memory losses. "I know you," he says softly, when Grace opens her eyes, and her heart leaps with desperate hope that his memory might be returning. "Do you remember our engagement, William?" "Do you remember asking me to marry you?" "No," he responds, settling into the chair beside her bed with careful attention. "But I remember watching you work during your first months at the company. You hummed while cleaning my office, pieces from Swan Lake and Giselle, classical compositions that most people wouldn't recognize. I pretended not to notice, but I found myself looking forward to those moments when music filled spaces that had been silent for years." Grace stares at him with amazement, realizing these are memories she didn't know he possessed, feelings he never expressed even when his cognitive abilities were intact. "You remember that specifically?" "I remember thinking you moved like a trained dancer even when emptying trash cans or dusting furniture," William continues, his voice gaining strength as older memories surface with increasing clarity. "I remember wondering what your story was, then feeling guilty for that curiosity, because acknowledging your personal history meant admitting you were a complete human being rather than simply a function I employed." William's confession reveals the depth and duration of his attraction to Grace, feelings that preceded their public confrontation by years rather than months. His cruelty at the charity gala wasn't spontaneous sadism, but the culmination of years spent fighting emotions he considered inappropriate for someone of his social position. "There's something else I remember," William says, leaning forward with the intensity of someone retrieving crucial information from deteriorating mental storage. "I remember my father getting drunk and crying about Ruth Jackson. He used to say she was the woman Grandpa should have married and the family we owed everything to but would never acknowledge. I knew about your heritage before you started working at the company, Grace. I knew, and I hired you because I wanted to see what Ruth Jackson's granddaughter looked like in person." This final revelation completes Grace's understanding of William's psychological complexity. His treatment of her wasn't random racism or simple cruelty. It was the tortured response of someone who knew he was falling in love with a woman his family had wronged, someone he should have elevated immediately but chose to punish for making him feel guilty about inherited privilege and unearned advantages. "You hired me because you knew my family history?" "I hired you out of curiosity," William admits. "I kept you employed because being near you felt like coming home to a place I had never been but somehow recognized." Grace reaches for his hand, and for the first time since his diagnosis progression, William's touch carries complete presence and intentional connection rather than the distracted affection of someone whose attention constantly drifts toward confusion. "William, I need you to listen carefully and try to remember what I'm about to say, even if you forget everything else about our relationship." "I'll do my best. I forgive you completely. Not because you're ill, not because I'm dying, but because your cruelty came from guilt and confusion rather than genuine hatred. I want you to know that our love, whatever it was or might have become, was authentic and meaningful." William's eyes fill with tears he doesn't fully understand, emotional responses that persist even when their context has been erased by neurological decline. "Why are you telling me this when I might not remember tomorrow?" "Because right now, in this moment, I want you to experience being loved and forgiven by someone who had every reason to hate you. Even if you forget this conversation, maybe some part of you will retain the feeling of being worthy of love despite your mistakes." Their conversation is interrupted by Dr. Sarah Chen arriving with news that transforms their final weeks together. An experimental treatment for early-stage Alzheimer's, previously unavailable due to FDA restrictions, has just received emergency approval for compassionate use cases. The treatment won't cure William's condition, but it might slow progression significantly and potentially restore some recent memories. The treatment requires consent from immediate family, Dr. Chen explains. "Technically, Grace is your legal next of kin as your fiancée, even though the wedding was postponed." Grace and William look at each other across the diminishing space between life and death, memory and forgetting, love, and loss, each understanding that this decision will determine whether their relationship concludes with shared awareness or solitary remembering. "Grace," William says, his lucidity flickering like candlelight in wind, "if this treatment works and I remember everything again, including the extent of how badly I hurt you, will you still forgive me?" "William," Grace responds with the profound gentleness of someone who has learned that dying teaches you which emotions matter most, "I forgive you for the things you remember, the things you've forgotten, and the mistakes you haven't made yet. That's what love means when time is limited. It means releasing everything except the choice to love." Grace signs the medical consent forms with hands that tremble from weakness, but remain steady in purpose and intention. As medical teams prepare William for experimental treatment that might restore his capacity to remember their complicated, beautiful, broken, and ultimately redemptive relationship, she realizes her final act of love might be giving him back the memories of how they learned to choose each other despite every reason not to. Grace wakes on Christmas Eve morning expecting to die within hours, her body having reached the final stages where kidneys fail and consciousness drifts between dream and reality. The hospice doctor estimated she has moments rather than days remaining, while William's experimental Alzheimer's treatment continues with uncertain outcomes. She finds herself surrounded by the people who have become her chosen family. Dorothy humming Christmas carols while organizing medications with practiced efficiency, James maintaining security protocols even in a medical facility, and Linda coordinating care with the administrative skills that once served corporate boardrooms. But Grace wakes to discover William sitting beside her bed, holding a cup of coffee and reading aloud from the Chicago Tribune's business section. He's not reading because she's interested in stock reports or market analysis, but because his voice has become the familiar soundtrack to her final days, a comfort that transcends the content of his words. "Good morning, Grace," he says, and something in his tone makes her study his face with sharp attention despite her medication-induced fog. "William, how much do you remember today?" He sets down the newspaper and takes her hand with the careful deliberation of someone who understands exactly how precious and temporary this gesture might be. "I remember everything," William responds, his voice carrying weight that indicates complete cognitive clarity. "The experimental treatment worked faster than anyone predicted. I remember hiring you because I was curious about Ruth Jackson's granddaughter. I remember 3 years of being systematically cruel because I was attracted to someone I thought my position required me to consider inferior. I remember the night you danced and forced me to confront the man I had become versus the man I could choose to be." Grace's heart simultaneously breaks and heals as she processes this information. "You remember our engagement?" "I remember proposing to you in front of 400 people, because I realized I would rather spend whatever time we had left being honest about loving you than continuing to pretend I was too proud or too superior to need your forgiveness and partnership." "And you remember that I'm dying?" William's smile contains infinite sadness, balanced by infinite tenderness. "I remember that we're both facing mortality, just at different speeds and through different mechanisms. And I remember that you taught me the difference between existing with inherited privilege and living with chosen purpose." Grace struggles to sit upright, and William helps her with movements that demonstrate weeks of practice caring for someone whose body is systematically failing. Through the hospice windows, Chicago spreads below them in Christmas Eve splendor, lights twinkling in apartment windows, families gathering around decorated trees, the city celebrating hope and renewal while Grace faces her final hours. "William, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. Anything you want to know. Are you here because you love me or because you feel guilty about how you treated me for 3 years?" William considers this question with the seriousness it deserves, understanding that her remaining time demands truth rather than comfort. Both feelings are present. But Grace, guilt fades when someone dies. Love doesn't. The fact that I'm going to miss you for however much time I have left, even if I eventually forget your name again, tells me which emotion is stronger and more authentic. Grace reaches into the bedside drawer and retrieves two items she has been saving for this exact moment: her grandmother Ruth's wedding ring and a legal document she prepared during her weeks of clarity between diagnosis and final decline. "William Ashford," she says with as much strength as her failing voice can summon, "I have a final proposition for you. I'm listening. Marry me. Right here. Right now. In this hospice room. Not because you owe me anything, not because I have hours rather than years remaining, but because in whatever time we have left, I want to be married to someone who learned to love me despite every reason not to. Someone who chose redemption over pride." William's eyes fill with tears as he processes her request. "Grace Washington, nothing in this world would make me happier than becoming your husband. The wedding happens within 2 hours, through arrangements Dorothy has been secretly preparing for days. She officiates, having obtained online ordination specifically for this purpose." James gives Grace away, walking beside her wheelchair as she's moved from the hospice bed to the facility's small chapel where William waits in his best suit. Grace wears a simple white dress that Linda found in her size, accessorized with Ruth's pearl necklace and the engagement ring William gave her months earlier. She appears fragile but radiant, carrying the unmistakable glow of someone who has chosen love over fear, connection over safety, hope over despair, despite facing imminent death. The ceremony includes only essential people: Dorothy, James, Linda, Dr. Sarah Chen, and a small group of Ashford employees representing the hundreds of working people whose lives Grace transformed through her sacrifice and systemic changes to the company structure. When Dorothy asks for wedding vows, Grace speaks first with voice that requires effort but carries unmistakable conviction. "William, you taught me that some people are worth forgiving before they deserve it, worth loving despite their capacity for cruelty, worth believing in even when they struggle to believe in themselves. You also taught me that the human heart has capacity for multiple loves without contradiction. I will always love Marcus for the man he was, and I will die loving you for the man you became." William's vow reflects the clarity that medical treatment has restored. "Grace, you taught me that love isn't something you fall into accidentally. It's something you choose deliberately every single day. You chose to love me when I was unworthy, to forgive me when I was unrepentant, to save me when I didn't deserve salvation. I choose to love you for whatever time we have remaining, and I choose to carry that love even when neurological decline eventually steals my ability to remember your name." Dorothy pronounces them husband and wife as snow begins falling outside the chapel windows, creating the perfect Christmas Eve atmosphere for a wedding that celebrates love's triumph over circumstances, illness, and time itself. The reception consists of Christmas Eve dinner in Grace's hospice room, featuring Dorothy's famous honey-glazed ham, James's cornbread stuffing recipe passed down through generations, and Linda's surprisingly excellent pecan pie. They watch classic Christmas movies, exchange modest gifts that carry disproportionate emotional weight, and share stories about holidays from their respective pasts. Grace's gift to William is a leather-bound journal filled with their complete story, every detail of their courtship, engagement, and marriage written in her careful handwriting, designed to help him remember their love during future periods when Alzheimer's returns to steal his memories. William's gift to Grace consists of video recordings he made during his days of restored clarity, Messages for Dorothy, James, Linda, and all the Ashford employees, thanking them for their love and asking them to remember Grace as someone who transformed inherited anger into chosen mercy, systemic invisibility into corporate influence, and historical injustice into structural justice. As evening approaches, Grace grows increasingly tired, her body demanding rest that will transition into final sleep. William carries her back to bed, and they lie together watching snow fall over Lake Michigan while Chicago celebrates Christmas Eve around them. "William," Grace whispers, "I want you to know that if I could design my perfect final Christmas, it would be exactly like this, married to someone who learned to love me authentically, surrounded by people who chose to become family, in a city that taught me both cruelty and kindness. Grace, I want you to understand that you saved me from becoming someone I would have despised. You took the worst aspects of my character and transformed them into motivation for becoming better." Grace falls asleep in William's arms as church bells across Chicago welcome Christmas morning. She dies peacefully at 3:17 a.m. on Christmas Day, with William holding her hand while Dorothy hums Silent Night in the background. Message for American seniors, 55 to 68. How many of us have felt invisible in our later years, watching younger generations overlook our experiences and dismiss our worth? Grace Washington's story reminds us that dignity isn't determined by age, position, or circumstances. It's something we carry within ourselves and choose to honor in others. Her journey from forgotten cleaning lady to transformative force proves that it's never too late for redemption, never too late to choose love over bitterness, and never too late to make decisions that outlive our physical presence. Whether you're facing health challenges, financial struggles, or simply the feeling that your best years are behind you, remember that Grace found her greatest love and most meaningful purpose in what should have been her final months. Sometimes our most important chapters are written when we think the story is ending. Your experience, wisdom, and capacity for both forgiveness and transformation matter more than society often acknowledges. What moment in your life made you feel most invisible, and how did you reclaim your dignity? Have you ever discovered that someone you thought was an enemy was actually struggling with their own pain and prejudice? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it today.